Executive? You? His laughter wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. The sound rang across the office, echoing against the glass walls like a gavel striking down a verdict. My manager leaned back in his leather chair, eyes narrowed with disdain, lips curling into that smug smile I would never forget. "Listen, darling," he said, in that patronizing tone I had grown to despise. "You're good at taking notes, maybe even fetching coffee. But an executive? Not in this lifetime. Not in this lifetime." Those words didn't just sting. They carved themselves into me like scars I couldn't erase. He didn't simply doubt me. He dismissed me, as though my ambition was nothing more than a silly dream to be laughed at. And worse, he wanted me to believe it too. But here's the thing he didn't know. Every time someone underestimates me, I don't shrink. I sharpen. I walked out of his office that day with trembling hands, but with a decision burning inside me. I wouldn't confront him then. I wouldn't scream or argue or demand his respect. No, that would have been too easy for him. Instead, I smiled politely, nodded, and left him with the illusion that he had broken me. Because while he thought I was crumbling, I was planning. His laughter didn't kill my dream. It became the fuel that would drive me further than even I thought possible. Each smirk, each sarcastic remark, each humiliating dismissal was another brick laid in the foundation of something far greater than he could imagine. I didn't cry in the bathroom. I didn't vent to my colleagues. I didn't beg for recognition. What I did was far more dangerous. I quietly made a vow. One day, I would rise so high that he wouldn't just regret his words. He would have to swallow them in front of me. I didn't know then exactly how it would happen, but I knew it would, because the thing about arrogance is that it blinds people. He thought he had written my story with one sentence. He had no idea he had just written his downfall. Every morning after that, I dressed differently. Not just in clothes, but in mindset. My heels clicked louder, my head held higher, my silence heavier with purpose. He thought I was staying in my lane. He didn't realize I was paving an entirely new road, one that would eventually lead me straight past him. Because when someone tells you that you can't, you have two choices: believe them or make them choke on their own words. And I chose the latter. So if you're listening right now, don't click away. What started as humiliation in a corporate office turned into a story of power, transformation, and poetic justice. Because years later, when he walked into a boardroom expecting to lead, he found me seated at the head of the table, his new CEO. "Not in this lifetime," he said. Well, let me tell you how I made it happen, in his lifetime. If you've ever been told you're not good enough, stay with me. This story will show you exactly how underestimation can become the greatest weapon of revenge. My name is Charlotte Hayes, and I am 30 years old. I was born and raised in a small town just outside Manchester, England. My childhood wasn't extraordinary, at least, not in the way most people define it. My father was a factory worker, hands calloused from years of labor, while my mother worked part-time at a bakery to help keep food on the table. We didn't have much, but we had dignity, discipline, and determination. My father often told me, "Charlotte, the world won't hand you respect. You'll have to carve it out for yourself." He never sugarcoated life. He knew struggle too well. Every evening, after returning home tired and covered in grease from the factory, he still sat at the kitchen table with me, quizzing me on homework, teaching me the importance of persistence. I carried his lessons like a shield. In school, I wasn't the prettiest girl or the most popular, but I was always the most determined. Books became my companions, ambition my compass. And while other girls dreamed of fairy tale weddings or glamorous lifestyles, I dreamed of boardrooms, strategies, and one day, power. University was my escape route. I earned a scholarship to study business management at a prestigious London university. It was there that I learned how stacked the odds truly were. In every classroom, men dominated the conversation, raising their voices with confidence, while women were often brushed aside, their ideas stolen or ignored. I learned quickly that talent wasn't always enough. Politics, alliances, appearances, those mattered too. Still, I pushed forward. I graduated near the top of my class, armed with ambition and a heart that burned for something greater. I believed, naively, that the corporate world would reward hard work, just like school had. I was wrong. The corporate towers of London were ruthless. They weren't built for women like me, women who came from modest backgrounds, who didn't have family connections, who didn't attend private schools or belong to elite social clubs. Men with half my intelligence but double my confidence soared ahead of me, while I was left grinding harder, staying later, pushing further. And then came him, the manager who would define my story, though not in the way he expected. He was charming to those above him, venomous to those beneath. He had a gift for manipulation, for making his failures look like others' mistakes, and others' successes look like his triumphs. To the outside world, he was ambitious and capable. To me, he was an obstacle, a gatekeeper determined to keep me in my place. At first, I believed if I simply worked harder, he would notice my value. I stayed long after the office lights, dimmed, perfected presentations, and carried the weight of entire projects. But instead of recognition, I was met with erasure. My ideas became his. My strategies were rebranded with his name. My late nights turned into his accolades. And every time I tried to speak up, he silenced me with condescension, with that smirk that made my blood boil. Until finally, that day in his office, he said the words that changed everything. Not in this lifetime. For him, it was the end of the conversation. For me, it was the beginning of a war. If you've ever been underestimated because of where you come from or who you are, don't go anywhere. Because what happened next proves that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's rising so high above them, they're forced to look up. The moment those words left his mouth, not in this lifetime, the office turned into a battlefield. He might not have realized it, but he had just declared war. At first, the attacks weren't obvious. They were subtle, quiet, the kind of daggers that didn't leave visible wounds but cut deep nonetheless. I would spend weeks building a proposal, refining the numbers, perfecting the strategy. The morning of the presentation, he would stride into the boardroom and deliver my work as if it had sprung fully formed from his genius. The executives would nod approvingly. They would praise him, and I would sit there forced to keep my expression neutral while my stomach twisted with rage. One night, I stayed in the office until nearly midnight finishing a risk analysis report. I left it on his desk, neatly bound, ready for the next day's review. But when the meeting came, he presented it word for word, without a single mention of me. Worse still, when questions were raised, he pointed toward me in the corner and said, "Charlotte helped with some of the basic research." Helped. That single word nearly broke. Okay, me. But breaking wasn't an option. Each time he stole my credit, I clenched my fists under the desk and reminded myself, one day, you'll answer to me. It wasn't just the theft of ideas. He actively sabotaged me, too. When I applied for a managerial position, he whispered to the hiring panel that I was too emotional, not ready, better suited as support staff. He recommended a man with half my experience instead. That man got the job. I should have quit. I should have walked away, saved myself the humiliation. But something in me refused. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the echo of my father's voice reminding me that nothing worth having comes easy. So I stayed, and I adapted. I stopped expecting fairness. I stopped waiting for recognition. Instead, I started studying him. I paid attention to his weaknesses, his obsession with looking good in front of executives, his reliance on people like me to do the actual heavy lifting, his tendency to underestimate anyone he thought beneath him. And I began to quietly build alliances. I offered help to colleagues in other departments, making sure they knew my name, my skills, my value. I nurtured relationships outside the company too, attending industry networking events, connecting with people who mattered beyond the four walls of our office. Every evening, while he celebrated stolen victories, I was plotting something bigger. I poured myself into learning. Leadership courses, financial strategy seminars, late-night case studies. My weekends became less about rest and more about preparation. Because I knew one day an opportunity would come. And when it did, I had to be ready. The breaking point came one winter morning. I walked into the office to find my latest project, one I had been leading for months, reassigned without explanation. He had given it to someone else, claiming I had too much on my plate. That was his way of saying, stay in your lane. I smiled, I nodded, I said nothing. But that was the day I stopped fighting for space, at his table. From then on, I was building my own. Stay with me, because what happened next flipped the entire game. The man who thought he was untouchable? He never saw the storm I was preparing, and when it hit, it would leave him standing on broken ground. I realized something important. I couldn't win inside the walls he controlled. The corporate hierarchy was his battlefield, and he had all the weapons. If I kept fighting on his terms, I would lose. So, I built my own battlefield. It started small. A connection I made at a networking event invited me to collaborate on a side project, a market analysis for a startup looking to scale. I poured myself into it, nights and weekends, hungry to prove what I could really do when no one was stealing the credit. The results spoke louder than I ever could. That startup doubled its revenue in 6 months. Word spread. More opportunities followed. Consulting work, strategy sessions, partnerships. I was no longer Charlotte the assistant. I was Charlotte the strategist. My reputation grew outside the walls where my manager kept me invisible. And then came the invitation that changed everything. A rival company, one far larger, far more ambitious than ours, approached me quietly. They had heard of my work, my results, my ability to see opportunities others missed. They wanted me on their leadership team. I hesitated. It felt like betrayal to leave without proving myself where I had been dismissed. But then I remembered his words. Not in this lifetime. Accepting that offer wasn't betrayal. It was survival. It was destiny. Within months, I was leading high-stakes projects that dwarfed anything I had done before. My new colleagues didn't see me as someone's assistant. They saw me as a force, and I proved them right, again and again. Success became addictive. Every deal I closed, every target I exceeded, every boardroom where my voice mattered. It was like reclaiming a piece of the dignity my manager had tried to strip away. But fate had one more twist in store. 2 years later, whispers of a merger began to circulate. My new company was expanding, looking to acquire smaller firms to tighten its grip on the industry. And guess which firm sat high on the list? His. When the announcement became official, I felt a chill run down my spine. The company where he had mocked me, belittled me, silenced me, the place I had once been trapped, was about to become ours. But that wasn't the best part. The merger came with a leadership reshuffle. The board wanted someone strong, someone proven, someone who could oversee the integration and lead the new entity forward. They chose me. Me. The girl he said would never make it to the executive table. Me, the woman he dismissed with laughter. Me, the new chief executive officer. The day it became official, I stood in front of the mirror, almost unable to breathe. I could see my father's reflection in my mind, tired from factory work, but smiling with pride. I could hear his voice. You'll have to carve it out for yourself. And I had. The battlefield was mine now. Don't look away, because the climax is next. Imagine walking into the boardroom, sitting at the head of the table, and watching the man who once mocked you walk in, only to realize you're now his boss. That moment was worth every scar, and it's a moment you need to hear. The boardroom was alive with tension that morning. Executives in sharp suits whispered across the long polished table, the buzz of anticipation thick in the air. It was the first official meeting since the merger, and everyone was waiting to see how the new leadership would take shape. I was already seated at the head of the table, papers neatly stacked before me, posture calm but commanding. My heart beat steady, not with nerves, but with certainty. This was my stage now. The door opened, and in he walked. My old manager, the man who had once laughed at me, who had stolen my ideas, who had told me I would never sit at this very table. His confident stride faltered the second his eyes met mine. For a split second, confusion flickered across his face, as if his brain refused to process what he was seeing. Then the color drained from his cheeks. He swallowed hard. His smirk was gone. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady, controlled. "Please, Take a seat. There was no sarcasm in my tone, no obvious bite. I didn't need it. My presence at the head of that table said everything. He lowered himself into a chair, stiff and silent. Around us, the other executives carried on as usual, unaware of the storm raging in his chest. But I could see it in his eyes. The disbelief, the humiliation, the dawning realization that the woman he had mocked now held his career in her hands. I opened the meeting, outlining the new vision for the company. Every word was deliberate, every phrase a demonstration of authority. My voice carried the weight he had once denied me. I spoke of strategy, growth, innovation, all the things he had once stolen credit for. But this time, there was no stealing. There was no silencing. There was only me. At one point, I turned toward him, locking eyes. And of course, I said smoothly, we'll be expecting complete cooperation from all department heads. Accountability will be key. The word hung in the air like a blade. Accountability. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. The ultimate revenge wasn't shouting at him. It wasn't rubbing my victory in his face. It was this. Watching him realize he had to answer to me. Watching him understand that the woman he had dismissed as nothing more than a note-taker was now his CEO. After the meeting ended, he lingered, perhaps hoping for a private word. I packed my papers slowly, deliberately making him wait. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Charlotte," he said, voice low, I did, and expect. I looked up, meeting his eyes with the calm fire of a woman who no longer needed his approval. "No," I interrupted. "You didn't expect. That was always your problem." He flinched, the words landing harder than any shouted insult. I walked past him, heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving him frozen in place. For years, he had controlled the narrative. But now he was just another employee, and I was the one writing the story. That day, I didn't just win. I rewrote every limitation he had tried to place on me. And the best part? I didn't need to humiliate him. His own downfall was enough. Stay with me for the final part, because revenge isn't just about winning, it's about closure. And when you hear how I reflected on that journey, you'll understand why this victory was more than personal. That night, after the boardroom confrontation, I sat by my apartment window overlooking the lights of London. The city pulsed with life, cars rushing, people chasing dreams, and in the quiet of my room, I finally let myself breathe. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to get revenge. I thought it would be explosive, fiery, a grand moment of humiliation for the man who once laughed in my face. But now that it had happened, it wasn't fire I felt. It was calm. The truth is, the sweetest revenge wasn't in watching him squirm. It wasn't in reminding him of his cruel words or listing all the ways he had tried to break me. It was in the silence of his realization, in the way his arrogance crumbled when he looked at me and saw not his assistant, not his subordinate, but his CEO. And even more than that, the real victory was proving something to myself. I had done it. The girl from a small town outside Manchester, daughter of a factory worker, underestimated, dismissed, told she'd never make it. She had risen, not just to an executive role, but to the very top. I remembered my father's tired hands, the way he used to come home with grease on his clothes and hope in his eyes. He had told me I'd have to carve my own respect in the world. That night, I knew I had carved it so deeply, no one could erase it. But here's the truth. I wish more people understood. Revenge alone isn't enough. If you make your life about proving people wrong, you'll always be living in their shadow. The real power comes when you stop chasing their approval and start building your own path. Yes, I wanted him to see me succeed. Yes, I wanted him to choke on his own words. But more than that, I wanted to see myself succeed. I wanted to become the kind of woman who didn't just rise above her enemies. She rose beyond them. That's what true transformation is. Because one day, the laughter that once cut you will mean nothing. One day, the voices that doubted you will fade, and all that will remain is your own voice, steady, strong, certain, reminding you that you were always enough. When I walked into that boardroom as CEO, it wasn't just my victory. It was for every woman who has been told she's too emotional, too ambitious, too weak for leadership. It was for every dreamer who has been underestimated. It was for every person who's been laughed at for daring to want more. So here I am telling you this. Don't let anyone write your story for you. Not a boss, not a critic, not even someone you once thought held all the power. Their words are just noise. What you build is the truth. And when your truth finally rises, it will drown out every laugh, every insult, every dismissal. Because the best revenge isn't destroying someone else's pride. The best revenge is standing so high above it that you can barely hear it anymore. That's what I did. And that's what you can do too. If you've ever been told you're not good enough, that you'll never succeed, let this story be your proof. You can. Share this with someone who needs the reminder. And remember, success isn't just the best revenge. It's the loudest voice you'll ever had.